Hi, this is Kara, and this is DIY on the house. Today I bring you into my sewing room because I have just finished a baby blanket. I'm super excited for this one. I used some primary colors, Western prints. I still have my threads to trim. It's still safety pinned, but at this point I've already machine quilted it and it's ready for the binding. And so before I went any further, I thought I would teach you how to bind a quilt. Okay, there's some easy math involved when you need to figure out how much binding you need for your project. So I'm going to take you to the computer and I'm just going to show you how you can easily figure out how much binding you need for your project. Let's start with just some basic calculations that you can then use for your own numbers. You need to take the perimeter, which is the distance around your project. You need to take that in inches and add 30 inches to it, and the excess is for how you join the strips together. You're going to be having some fabric wasted in that. So then you're going to take that number and you're going to divide it by the width of the fabric that you're using for your binding. And that's going to give you the number of strips that you have to cut. In order to find out how much fabric you need to take that number of strips and take it times 2.5 inches, which is the width of the strip, and that is going to give you the width of the fabric needed in inches for your binding. Here is a sample to give you an idea of what numbers. So you're going to just plug your own numbers into these formulas. Take your perimeter, you add the 30 inches. So this one's 240 plus 30 is 270 inches. You're going to take the 270 and you're going to divide it by the width of the fabric. So in this case, pretend you're using 43-inch wide fabric. You're going to divide that, and that tells you you need to cut 6.3 strips. You take 6.3 times the width of the strip that we're cutting, which is 2.5 inches, and that tells you you need 15.75 inches of fabric. So basically you need a half a yard of fabric. But you can also use scraps of fabric that you are left over from your project. And I'm going to illustrate that one in today's binding project. So, as with most quilt projects, you have scraps left over. For me, a binding on a quilt is seen but not heard. I like to use fabric that I used in the project. There's leftover pieces, and even though there might be several of these pieces, I'm going to show you how to put those together, and it just makes a really effective way to use up your scraps and to make it match your quilt. So this is a scrap piece that I'm going to use for my binding, and I'm just laying it down on my quilting mat, and I'm just going to square up one side. Take away the scrap. Now you have a straight side. Binding for me, my preferred width is 2 1/2 inches. So I'm going to cut the remaining piece here 2.5 inches wide. It does not matter that this end is not squared up, because I'm going to show you in a second what we do with this piece. So again, 2.5 inches wide, cutting a strip until there's nothing left of your scrap. And unfortunately, that one is not wide enough. You do not want to skimp or trick on this. So if it's not 2.5 inches wide, then just disregard it and don't use it. Here are some strips that are 2.5 inches wide from fabric that is left over from the quilt. I'm going to combine these together to make my binding. In order to combine them together, you have a simple technique to make it a continuous line. So you lay one of your strips in this direction and face up. You lay the other one face down. So at this point you have right sides together, and you put them at a 90-degree angle to each other. At this point, I'm going to put a pin on here so that you guys can see what I'm doing. And just pretend that this pin is acting like stitches on your machine, just so you can see the full effect. So again, use your imagination right now. These pins are machine stitched line. So you're going from one corner to the other. When you pull your fabric and you lay it in a straight line, it makes a diagonal seam. So then when you put this on your quilt, you don't have this bulky seam and distracting from your beautiful project. Once you get the hang of this, you do not need to draw a line for your sewing path, but I do like to do it to get my rhythm, make sure I'm good. You're going to be sewing from the upper left to the lower right. You can also say you're sewing from northwest to southeast. You can do however you can get in your head to get the rhythm, but I'm going to draw a line, and that is my sewing path. And I will put a pin on there so that when I move over to my machine, that I'm not going to distract you, and I'll get that sewn for you. Okay, I have it in my machine. I realized I still have my walking foot on from when I machine quilted it, but I do like to use a walking foot when I attach the binding, so I'm just gonna leave that on there. So again, let me pull this out. Again, you're sewing from one upper left corner to the lower right corner. Since there is tension on a binding, I do like to back stitch at the beginning and the end of my stitch. You know you have done it correctly if when you lay it down, you pull this way and you have a nice straight line. At this point, you can take scissors and trim off to a seam allowance there. Since I'm standing at the cutting table, I am just going to zip a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now you have your seam allowance and you have a straight line. We're going to go now to the iron, and I'm going to show you how you take the next step. Okay, it might not be necessary to show you this part because it is kind of self-explanatory, and I'm showing you my old worn ironing board here. But you just, at this point, you take your binding and you just fold it in half. So at this point you have wrong sides together, right sides facing out, and you just iron the entire strip of your binding to prepare it to sew to your quilt. I have all of my binding prepared. I have sewn it end to end like we had shown. So we have a diagonal seam, and they are 2.5 inches wide, folded in half with right sides out. So you see the good side of the fabric at this point. I have my quilt, and I'm going to show you how to attach your binding to your quilt. When you start out, I fold over the first part of the binding by about a really generous 1/4 inch, because when you're coming back around, pretend you've sewn all around, and this is the binding that's coming in from the other side, it will sew on top of where you started, so that when you fold it over, it gives you a finished edge right away. So fold over the beginning of your binding. Just line up the edge of the binding with the edge of the quilt. Again, this has already been machine quilted. I haven't trimmed any threads or anything, but it is already machine quilted. I've cut the edges square, my corners are square, and I just do a 1/4 inch seam back stitching at the beginning. Okay, I'm getting to the corner here, and I purposely started there. You don't, as far as I know, there's no theory on where you start your binding, but I wanted to start sort of near a corner so that you guys could see right away. You're going to come up to the corner, and I am just going to sew off the edge. Back stitch there. Going to cut my thread. turn my quilt. I have my quilt turned to ready to go down the other side. It's sewn here. I have my binding off to the right. You take the binding and you fold it up to the edge that you just sewn on. So we have it folded up there. It makes, I'm making a little tent there so you can see it. It makes a 90-degree triangle. So you have your edge folded up there, and this edge follows your quilt. So I need to scoot that over just a little bit. I'll sew a little way so that you can see what this does for you. And I backstitch in the beginning. Following the edge of the quilt. Okay, just for demonstration, I'm going to stop this here and show you. So now you have a corner that when we start slip stitching this, you slip stitch it there, and I'll show you the slip stitching part, but I just wanted to show you why this is so cool. So now you go like this, and you're going to fold it there. Look at what a good corner that is going to make. So that's for a little bit later in the video, but I wanted just to give you a visual of what you are doing at this point. I have the binding attached all the way around. This is where I started, and so when you sew it around, you overlap it enough so that you don't have multiple layers in one spot. So I extended it for about 1 inch, and here is your corner. And now I am going to show you how you bend or turn the binding back and slip stitch it. To reduce some of the bulk, cut off the tip of the corner. So you're cutting off the binding and the excess there, and if there's any stray threads in that area. Everyone has bad habits. My bad habit is I just wait to the end and I clip all of my threads at that point. Now you take your binding and you bring it to the back of your project. And with a thread that sort of coordinates, I'm using red throughout, even though this is blue right now. And I start my yarn or thread back here, and you just do the best you can to hide your stitch. So I'm not going all the way through the quilt. I'm doing the best I can just to hide it. And want to keep going here for a second and show you what you do when you get to the corner. Okay, I'm getting close to the corner here. So here we have the corner, and I'd like to say that every single time you come to the corner it's going to be as easy peasy. Fabric, as you know, bends different ways, so you fold your corner. And you know what, I think I'm going to just put a pin in there for illustration right now so that you can see. I'm going to fold this, the side that I'm going to, just pin that in place. And you can see that this makes a really good 45-degree angle there. So you're still hiding your stitch. I'm going to come up in that 45-degree. I'm going to put a couple stitches in that spot there. So there's 2 stitches. Go up the valley a little bit. I'm going to do one up there. I think quilts should last for a lifetime. So the stronger you make these little seams now, the better. So I did one up there, and I'm going to go back down. You just continue down the binding until you have finished your project. I believe you have all the tools necessary to attach your own binding. I'm going to go finish this one and wrap it up for my friend for their first grandbaby. If you have any questions, please comment below and I'll get back to you. But as always, thank you for watching DIY on the House. Give me a thumbs up and please subscribe. We really do appreciate it. Have a great day.